Let's talk about making your marriage great. As we talk today, let's talk about marriage roles. What is it that husbands and wives are supposed to do? What are their duties in marriage? The Bible tells us, Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 33, nevertheless, let each one of you in particular love his own wife as himself. And let's be sure that the wife also respects her husband. Once again, Ephesians 5 and verse 33. One of the interesting things about many marriages today is how different the roles are of husbands and wives. Let me give you an example. Imagine a girl grows up in a family, and as she's growing up in her family, her father is very particular in the clothes that he wears. He's a businessman. And so every day he gets up and he will not let anybody else launder his clothes, and especially iron his clothes. The creases have to be just in the right spot on the pants and on the sleeves of the shirt. Everything is always very, very crisp. He's very diligent about it. Doesn't want anybody to touch any of his clothes because he really cares how he looks. Now, her future husband grows up in a family where, the mother is always busy. So if they're in a hurry, she doesn't want to iron clothes, so she just throws clothes in the dryer and that'll get the wrinkles out. And really, honestly, the young man doesn't care if his clothes are wrinkled or not. It doesn't matter to him at all. Now, this young lady and this young man marry. And as they marry, they began to spend life together, began to go through each and every day. And the wife looks at her husband and says, well, your clothes are always wrinkled. You should go and iron your clothes. And the husband looks at the wife and says, well, if you're supposed to iron the clothes. That's how it was in my family. If you care about this, you're supposed to be the one doing it. And so it's an interesting relationship there when you look at the relationship of the roles which should happen. Who is it that makes the bed in the morning? Who is it that cooks dinner? Who is it that does the laundry and the dishes? Who is it that mows the yard? Who is it that weed eats? Who is it that fixes the car and makes sure the car is serviced? Who is it that takes care of the pets? Each one of these things are part of a marriage role which is there. Now, we live in an interesting time. Almost a century ago, back in the 1950s, marriage roles were much more defined. Fathers would always go to work. Mothers would always stay home. So mothers, naturally at that time, would do all of the housework and do much of the financial things and do much of those sort of things. Fathers would oftentimes go and do all the work. I mean, sometimes in some families they did all the finances. But the marriage roles were more clearly defined back at that time. And then as we've come to modern America, suddenly many of the gender roles that we have in America are interchanged. They're fluid. And so sometimes you'll see a family where the father does most of the cooking. Sometimes you'll see a family where the mother does all the laundry. Sometimes you'll see a situation where a father is the one who does all the lawn work. And sometimes you'll see a situation where the mother does all the maintenance on a car. It depends on each family what exactly is done. Well, when people are getting married, they talk about the big stuff. Will the wife work outside the home? That sort of thing. But very rarely do they cover these small things or even think about it until there you are. You come home from the honeymoon and suddenly you realize there's some things we haven't covered. There's some things we have not discussed at all. Well, the Bible tells us that it's possible to be equal and have different roles. That is a very true statement. When you read in Ephesians chapter 1, you see that God the Father is the one who plans our salvation. That's verses 3 through 4. You see that Jesus has shed his blood for our salvation. That's verses 4 through 7. You see the Holy Spirit seals our souls for salvation. That's verses 13 and 14. Now the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the Trinity of the Godhead, they're all one. They're all equal, but they all have different roles in our salvation. Well, in the very beginning, when you look at the very beginning of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 28, God told Adam and Eve a command. And that was to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and also have dominion or take care of all the earth as well. In this thing, Eve had a part and Adam had a part. Of course, Eve played a greater part when it came to being fruitful and multiplying. Adam had a part in that. Adam had a part in parenting as well. But a lot of the being fruitful and multiplying went towards Eve. Much of the dominion of the earth went towards Adam, although Eve also played a part in that as well. And so it's interesting to see how those sort of things happen. Now, in Genesis 3, when the curse came, you see where the curse came upon Eve in her role. And that was in childbearing. There would be great pain in childbearing, which was there. And the curse also came upon Adam in his role as well, as he would sweat with the toil of his brow. He would work with his life, only to find out at the end of his life, much of what he did really was for naught. It was vanity, as you would see later. And so, as you see that, you see the different roles which are given. But these roles are not always airtight. As a matter of fact, you go into many third world countries, agrarian societies, many times women work in the field much more than the men do. And oftentimes you look around and you see that there are men who play a huge role in parenting in many cultures. And in many ways, this is good. Even in the Bible, we see this. In Proverbs chapter 31, when you read about the virtuous woman, you see a woman who works outside the home, a woman who works inside the home, a woman who works everywhere because she wants to make sure her family is a success. But the Bible does tell us that husbands need to work to provide for their families, because those who do not provide for their families are worse than an infidel. Socrates, an ancient philosopher in 450 BC, had a statement which has come down even to today. And that statement is this. He said, you would go to the highest places in Athens. And as you go there, he said, why do you turn every stone to scrape a little bit of wealth together, and yet you care so little for those children to whom one day you shall relinquish it all? And what Socrates is saying is, when we talk about roles, when we talk about occupations, when we talk about work, don't forget the things that are even more important. Make sure your children are nurtured and cared for in the Lord. Make sure that your spiritual life and the spiritual life of your spouse is taken care of as well. It's important for each one of us to look through the different roles that we play in marriage, the different tasks which are there. It's important to have a made-up bed. It's important to have an ironed shirt. It's important to make sure the yard is mowed. These things need to be discussed. In Amos chapter 3, verse 3, Amos says this, can two people walk together unless they are agreed to do so? It's important to discuss roles. It's important that the marriage, in every aspect of the marriage, in every aspect of life, be shared in an equitable and a good way. Now, this will be different from family to family. This will be different from couple to couple. But these things need to be discussed. It's important to do these things to make your marriage great.